Hey, this is Terry from AJ Aircraft, here to do another episode of RCTEK, and today we're going to be talking about engine tuning, basic engine tuning. I'm going to do the best I can to describe engine tuning, partially because we've tried to do video of the process, and the process is easy, but the sound that you have to listen to of the engine operating while you're tuning doesn't transfer very well onto video. For those that are new to gas, there's a lot of hobbyists coming into the hobby these days that skip the whole glow fuel generation and don't understand tuning really at all. And so I'm gonna just kind of basically describe the carburetor, a couple of things you should do when you first get the engine and you're installing it. And we'll talk about some of the things to look for during the tuning process. What I have done, many of you have probably seen the instructional that I've written up on engine tuning, and a lot of people have used that. Get a lot of compliments on how their engines run better, and oh, my engines have never started like this or never ran like that. So it's helped a lot of people. So what I've done is I converted that into a PDF format. And I've got two formats of it. One prints on a little bit larger and prints on 2 pages. It's a little bit easier to see. The other version of it prints on a single page, because I know a lot of people comment on how they print this and put it in their trailer or truck, or take a couple of guys say they take copies to the field so that guys have trouble, they can hand it out, which is awesome. So I put this in a PDF format. It will be available on the AJ Aircraft website, as well as the brand new Facebook page for the AJ Aircraft RCTEK, where all these videos are going to be posted. So look for that. If you can't find it, PM me or message me and I'll make sure you get it. With that, I'm going to zoom in on the engine and just talk a little bit about some of the points of the carburetor. And we'll just kind of generally go through this tuning procedure. I'm not going to go through every word. I'm just going to get some highlights that I'd like to describe in a little bit further detail than what's on here. Read this step by step, follow it word by word, and you will have an engine that runs. Okay, so what I want to just cover, like I said, is a couple of things for especially aimed at the new guys that are just putting together their first gas engine, or maybe just didn't really know this stuff. For those of you that have been doing this for years, it might be a little bit simple, but a lot of guys just don't pick up on this right away. I gathered up a collection of engines that I had on the shelf here, and kind of on purpose. You'll see what I've got here is a DLE 120, a DA 120, I've got a ZDZ 180, GP 176, and a Valley View RC 70, which actually I just got not too long ago for a scale project I'll be working on this winter. There's all these different engines, all will tune exactly the same. So this tuning guide that I talked about, and if you haven't seen it before, make sure you download a copy and check it out after the video. Even if you've been flying and tuning engines for years, a lot of people still have been doing it wrong. Taught people how to tune engines at the field that have been flying way longer than I have, and they really didn't understand. This will tell you how to do it correctly, and what it leaves you with is a very slightly rich engine that is going to basically give you your best case scenario at success tune. It's not going to be too rich, it's not going to be too lean. It's going to allow a little bit of tuning range for those extra hot days when you go out, and it's maybe going to get a little bit warm, or engine might run a little bit lean. It's that tuning process is leaving a little bit of fuel to account for that. If you travel a lot and you change elevation a lot, there's built-in room in there that you don't have to mess with retuning. So definitely make sure you download that and check it out. Okay, so let's get down to the basics here. If you get a brand new engine, and all of these are exactly the same, when you get the new engine, 99% of the time you're gonna find there's gonna be this screw. And if you look at what this screw is doing, in the manual they'll call it an idle RPM set or an idle set. and all that is doing is limiting carburetor arms so that it's basically setting a mechanical a low RPM, and if you look inside there, the carburetor is going to be slightly open. What you want to do with that, actually here's another one. This engine's brand new as well, and you can see the screw a little bit better there. So there's a screw right there, and it's stopping the RPM a little bit up. What you want to make sure you do is take a screwdriver. I'll do it on this one. Okay, it's always going to have a spring on it, and now when you remove that, your carburetor will close fully. So what you want to do with this is throw it in your garbage can and don't ever think about it again, because you're never going to need it on an RC airplane. All it will do is cause you trouble if you try to leave that in there. So that's step one, as soon as you open the engine and take it out of the box. Okay, now that we've got that, step two is if it did not come with NGK CM6 spark plugs, depending on where you bought it, some of the cheaper Chinese engines they'll come with a Chinese logo spark plug. Or DLE is famous for that. They'll come with a DLE branded spark plug. Throw that in the garbage as well, and go and get yourself an actual NGK CM6 spark plug. A lot of the manufacturers nowadays are just going ahead and doing that for you and including that in there. Make sure you don't run the China ones. They're just extremely hit and miss in quality, and they cause symptoms of troubles that can have you chasing around for wiring and ignition kills and even tuning, and it's just not worth it. Get the real plugs and put them in there. I'm not going to show it, but make sure you do gap the spark plugs. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take an X-Acto knife and use that to gap your plug. So you won't be able to fit this in as it comes out of the box. You'll want to finesse that in there, and it should just slip in between there freely. It should not have any more gap than the X-Acto blade. So you'll need to open that up so that fits in. That's basically the exact dimension that you're going to want to start with on your plug. What I like to do, regardless of brand, I know a lot of people say DAs come tuned from the factory. They don't necessarily tune them for performance. They just make sure that it's getting running and the needles are at a safe place for you to be able to start the engine, and it'll start for you. It's not going to be tuned, so you definitely want to tune any engine that you get. Tuning is going to be different for your place in the country. It's going to be different for your exhaust. It could be different with the relative humidity that you have just in your general area. So definitely check the needle settings as it comes out of the box. So get your manual and read what's in the manual, what it says for the low needle and the high needle setting, and make sure that your carburetor is set to that. And then that's one less thing for you to remember to do at your field at maintenance at maiden day. So there's every gas engine that has a Walboro or a Walboro knockoff carburetor like a DLE is going to have exactly the same needles, and it's always going to have a high and a low. And just so it's easy for you to remember which one's which, if you can't see it written on the carburetor, say you're reaching through your cowl and you can hardly see it, which one's which, the low is always the closest one to the engine. So then that means the high is always the furthest away from the engine. So something for you to remember, just so they don't bounce around, they don't change by brand of carburetor or size of carburetor or anything. It's always that way. So the other thing that I want to explain before you get into tuning is two things with the needle settings that will help you to know. Number one is the low needle actually is not just, some people will refer to it as an idle needle. It's not actually an idle needle. Like on a glow engine, the low needle is basically your very low, and your high needle is basically metering the fuel in, and it's carrying the engine through most of the RPM. On a gas engine, it's not even close to that. The low needle takes care of everything from idle to about 2/3 of your throttle, or your 2/3 of your RPM. But your high needle, just for basic thinking, is just say it's going to be the top third, and then they actually work together all the way to the top. So what that means is your low needle is very important. I don't explain all that detail, but that's why I'm doing the video, just so you know. That's why you do the low first. So that's going to be the majority of what you're going to want to look for and do as you take the engine out of the package and you're working on getting ready to mount it on your airplane. Everything else is pretty basic, your basic functionality, and everything should be fine on a brand new engine. Once you get to the field and you're gonna do your tuning and your initial startup, just make sure you take a copy of this with you if you haven't done it. It's good to have, just so that you can follow the steps. Because with this process, it's very important, as we discussed with the needles, it's very important to read each step and follow, and don't omit steps. If you get stuck and something's not working, don't skip a step and hope that it gets better as you go down the list of steps. You want to back up and fix whatever is going wrong. Really, this is pretty simple the way I've got this laid out. There's a section here on some things that you have to do before you actually dive into the tuning process. Those things are gonna basically include make sure the engine's warm. You cannot tune a cold engine or a cool engine. You need to get it up to running operational temperature. The other thing that I talk about here that's very important is your idle speed. Need to make sure that you have a low idle. You can't tune an engine that's idling at a pretty high RPM. It's just not going to work. You're not going to get a good reading on that low. Very important. As with every step, everything's important. It kind of comes without saying. Okay, so in the instructional, when you read it, you've probably read it by now. It says that when you're testing your low, that you need to first, the engine's already warm, but you need to clean it out. So what do I mean by clean it out? So your engine is probably getting some excess fuel in it. It might be stumbling a little bit. It's probably rich with the stock settings and that kind of thing. So if it starts to load up and get excess fuel in the crankcase that's not burning, you need to throttle up and clean that out. A couple of full throttle runs, get it cleaned out, and then go to idle. Make sure that that's your low idle, as we described as in the write-up. And when I say to transition from low to high to check your low needle, it's not you never go like this. It's like a switch. It's low to high. That's the only way that you're going to tell really well how lean or rich you are. Essentially, think of your engine as a pump. If the pump is not getting enough fluid, say it's a pump up for water and it's getting air bubbles. When you try to speed up the pump, it's gonna gasp because it's got air bubbles and it's gonna get less efficient and everything else. And so it's gonna basically cough, and that means you're lean, when your engine just kind of goes bleh and dies when you do this. Now the other way around, if we say the engine is rich or fat, once you've idled down here for 5 or 10 seconds and you give it this, if it stumbles and smokes and coughs a little bit, the engine has got a lot of excess fuel in it because it's bringing the fuel in faster than you're burning it. That's a rich setting. So that's also not necessarily a good thing, because if it gets way too rich, you can actually kill it if you let it load up too long. So there's a fine line between there that we're looking for, and that's what you're going to get from this. Ideally, idle, pretty nice. About 10 or so seconds, it should maybe start to slow down in RPM just a little, where it's actually just starting to load up a little bit. but it still should have no hesitation when you do this. It might give a little you know, and then go up if you let it sit too long. But same thing with checking the high needle to the low needle. You know, once you get the low done, and I talk about in here about checking your high needle, we're gonna go full throttle for 10 seconds or so. You're gonna get it good and cleaned out. It's probably your best chance of getting it a little bit warm, and then you're gonna go down just like a switch. And then that's the point. As soon as that comes down, that's when you listen to see what your lows do, or what your highs doing. If you're lean, if it was running out of fuel here, it's gonna send you a signal down here. And if it was loading up with fuel here, it's gonna send you a totally different signal when you go to low. So I have that all spelled out here. As long as I have the radio here, I want to talk about something that's very important as well. I'm going to talk about in an upcoming video as well on mixing, and I'm going to do a whole nother video on throttle setup and things. I did one before, but I'm going to do one for RCTEK. We're going to do a lot more detail. Once you get your throttle set up, make sure that you set an idle up switch. It should never really be an idle down switch, and here's what I mean by that. So once you get your engine tuned and it's hot, and probably after a flight, you're going to want to double check your low idle. What I say is, just because I don't like RPM numbers, when you list an RPM number, some people shoot too hard to get that number, and for the most part RPM numbers are, just take that out of the equation. The low idle should be basically where the plane will sit on grass and not move. And your high idle, if you put that on a switch, should kick up the RPM just enough to make the plane start to roll on its own on grass. So if it's sitting there idling, hit idle up, it should just start to roll forward a little bit. That's very important, and actually use an idle up on your electric planes, basically everything. It makes a huge difference in your flight and everything, especially on electric planes, because your plane just dies when you throttle down, and then it starts back up. That's a whole other subject, but it takes more amps, and you'll notice a huge difference in your flying if you use an idle up on your electrics. But on a gas engine, that's going to save you from well, just a scenario. Just about everybody's been at the field at some point, and somebody does something aggressive in the air and they get a dead stick. Well, why did they get a dead stick? It likely was just that your RPM was too low. Your engine is a little bit hot or a little bit rich, and you go in and say do something like a pop top, where you're going into it and you're going to spin and you're going to chop the gas at the top so that you spin around. That immediate G-forces, as well as the chopping of the stick when you're on a low idle flying, that's where you get your dead sticks. Pop tops are notorious for killing airplanes. There's several other maneuvers. That's just probably the best example. So when you use that idle up, you'll basically idle up as you taxi out. You're going to take off. You idle up when you're done flying and you're making your last round. You're going to make one more loop to come around and land. Idle down, so you make one more circuit and come down, and it's going to land at a much lower RPM, and you'll be much happier. The reason I say make sure that you have an idle up instead of an idle down is because your idle itself may change a little bit depending on the temperature outside and that sort of thing. When you set your engine up, you're going to set your actual low idle with your servo travel. You can use that to fine tune, but it should not be used to set anything. So use your servo travel, set your low idle, and then you'll do a throttle to throttle mix. And I'll do this. I'll go through and actually do it very soon in an upcoming video. And you'll set a throttle to throttle mix at a certain value, usually about 7%. That'll actually just kick that up just a little bit. Okay, so with that, I think we've covered just about everything I can, since I can't actually run an engine and let you listen to the things I'm describing. People have had great success with this, so I know that it's pretty understandable. What you'll see is I describe what to do, and then the very next step, like your low needle, It describes what to do with your low needle, and then the next step actually describes what should you hear, what's correct. And your high needle, same thing, what to do, what it should do, and then a final closing on some final testing and stuff. And will ensure you a lot of happy flying without dead sticks and erratic engine operation. So hopefully this works for you. Make sure you print out a few of these because your guys at the field are going to want them too. Thanks a lot. Be sure to check in with us on our next episode of RCTEK.